Welcome to Star Wars Timeline. In today's podcast, I want to talk about something very special to me, and it's Luke Skywalker's portrayal in The Last Jedi. We all know it's a very controversial movie. It divided the fandom. There's an army of fans who dislike Luke's portrayal. There's another half of the fandom who really enjoyed that film. And the point of this video is not to be controversial or create a clickbait video that people come into and be angry. No, I want to have a very balanced and two-sided discussion with you guys and present both points of view. I want to play sort of a devil's advocate and present an argument why Luke was the hero that we need in this film versus why Luke doesn't work and he's not really a good character and he's a betrayal of everything that fans were expecting. So before we start, why should you be watching to this video if you're a newcomer and it's your first time at the Star Wars Timeline? Let me tell you just a little bit about myself and the angle that I'm coming from. So I was the Star Wars fan since 1987, since my dad introduced me to the original trilogy on VHS tapes. You know, I saw the prequel movies in theater as they were coming out here in New York City. And I have a very strong opinion about all of those films. But I think I have a quality which is, I think all of us should have, is my opinion constantly changes and evolves. If I didn't like prequels when they just came out, because of comic books, because of the expanded universe, and because of rewatching those movies numerous times, I found things to enjoy there. And when the sequels started coming out, my expectation obviously was as big as yours, and I was very excited for them. And there were things that I didn't like about those as well, but I overall enjoyed the films. And to speak of the entire franchise, maybe perhaps excluding the original trilogy from the conversation, because, you know, I was a child when I grew up around those, and they will always represent to me the pinnacle of Star Wars. I have a very wide range of opinions about all of Star Wars. That includes the shows and the comic books and the books and so forth. And I want to indicate before we jump into this discussion that no opinion is really right or wrong. We all come from a personal life experience, and all depends on your perspective and what you were seeing, what you're looking for in those films. And I strongly believe that a spectrum of opinions on The Last Jedi is a very good indicator. Why? Because as I was taught in film school, when you finish a film and the credits roll and it left no impression and you just go about your business and you forget the film or a book the next day, that's the worst place that the storyteller wants to be in. Now, if the film that you're viewing evokes a response, whether it's a positive response, it's a negative response, a strong reaction, that means the story has certain energy, certain weight behind it. Now, you don't necessarily need to agree with it, but because we're all different human beings, there will be other people who walk into it and say, wow, for example, you know, you didn't like the Girl with a Dragon Tattoo film. I thought it was very enjoyable in cinematography, and so on. You get the idea. So without further ado, let's start with some of the points that a lot of fans were very critical with, including one of my best friends, William, that him and my younger brother, Joe, who also has like a YouTube channel, we all went to see the sequels together. And my younger brother is a casual fan. He just enjoys watching the movies once or twice. My boy William is a huge fan, and he always been, and his opinions on prequels and on the sequels are very different from mine. And one of the common topics that people talk about when they see Luke in The Last Jedi is that the childhood hero that they know and remember has been betrayed. It's not the same character. He acts differently. His motivations don't coincide with the Luke that we last saw in the last episode of the original trilogy, episode 6, The Return of the Jedi. And it's not the Luke Skywalker that they wanted to see. And they support that idea also with Mark Hamill's known ideological disagreements with Rian Johnson and saying, look, I don't believe that you're portraying this character that I've played before, and I don't think that's the route Luke would have gone. And I think those are all pretty valid criticisms, and because we all have certain expectations going into picture, mine are different from yours, but it's hard to argue the point that Luke is quite a different person. I would personally say he has evolved, matured, and became somebody different, perhaps more cynical, but it's hard to argue that he's the Luke that we remember. Also, fans say that he's out of character and that he's a coward who abandons his friends. You know, he's, for some reason, after fighting so hard to restore the freedom in the galaxy, fighting for the rebellion, for the good cause, and defeating the Emperor and Vader, Luke would never leave his friend behind. Everything that he bled and suffered for, he would always be there as as a wall, as a shield to protect his friends, no matter what. And again, it's a pretty strong case for it. If you expect Luke to be always the person that he was in his 20s when we last see him at the Return of the Jedi, then yes, I assume from that point of view, it's a pretty solid argument saying that, look, what we see here in The Last Jedi, that's not Luke. He would never do that. And even Mark Hamill, shared that same sentiment. And one of the strongest and most emotional components in The Last Jedi is the scene where he's about to murder his nephew Kylo Ren. Now, what's interesting about it, the scene is portrayed from completely two different perspectives. We see Luke Skywalker's version as it slowly evolves and he imparts more details, information to Rey, saying exactly what happened there. And then we see Kylo's version, and he said, well, you think Luke Skywalker is this guy? No, this is what he tried to do to me. This is what he is. And we have to leave all of this in the past. So it's a very contentious point. I have something to say against that, but I perfectly understand fans who felt very emotional in that part and say, well, no, this movie doesn't work for me. That's not the Luke that we wanted. Another point is that my friend William, for example, had was that Luke doesn't show up in physical form for the final battle. And it felt meaningless to them. That he said, look, I in general don't have problems with Luke Skywalker. That's my boy William. We were discussing the film when he came out of theaters. We saw it together. And he said, look, I may disagree with a couple of things here and there, but okay, I understand the Luke that they're trying to portray, this cynical, older guy, and, he makes mistakes, he's not perfect. But I disagree. I think he should have been there fighting the fight. And, when we see that his X-Wing is submerged in the water, it's like, why didn't he extract it and, pull it out of the water, jump in the ship, and come back and, save the day? Because William felt that Rian Johnson was subverting our expectations too much. And he was saying, look, at one point in the film, I want a reward. I understand the lesson you were trying to teach to us in this film, that people fail sometimes, even heroic figures. But it's a film, and we want an emotional relief. And it would have been awesome to see that Luke is back and him standing versus the entire First Order and demonstrating the full extent of his power. And only then, after he defeats Kylo, he tells him, look, this is my lesson to you. And, now already, because I exerted myself too much, he passes on. Or maybe even Luke passes in a heat of combat, that he actually battles the First Order and Kylo Ren with intent to kill them, to extinguish them. And that's the way that he dies and allows Leia and Rey and all the guys to escape. So these are some of the major points that I've heard, and I understand them to a certain degree. And the one that I understand the most is that Luke is not the person that people expected to see. Now, I would like to have my own response to those arguments. And like I said in the beginning of the video, I want to have a balanced view of it. That there is another half of fandom, myself included, who enjoyed The Last Jedi immensely. And saying that, I acknowledge that the film has a lot of issues. There's some pacing issues. We all are in agreement, I would say, that the Canto Bight was overly extended, and there were some exceptionally well-made shots that ended up on the cutting room floor, like Luke's lesson to Rey in Acto with the village, that he tells her not to rush into things and try to evaluate the situation as the Jedi should. I thought it was such a wonderful scene that didn't make it into the film, and I couldn't understand why. So with that being said, that I understand it's far from a flawless film, yet I enjoyed it because certain things in it resonated with me in a very powerful manner. And to give you guys my angle, a perspective where I'm coming from, I read tons of expanded universe books, legends. I've been reading them since 90s. And there we'll also encounter very different portrayals of Luke based on the author. We see Luke who is invincible in the height of his powers, and he's untouchable. We see Luke who is also vulnerable, and he's prone to mistakes, errors in judgment for which his family even suffers. For those of you guys who read the New Jedi Order series, you probably understand what I'm talking about. But here are my thoughts and ideas and things which I responded to in The Last Jedi, which I believe represents the other half of the fandom, which are also valid opinions. First and foremost, Luke not being the hero that everybody expected to be. He isn't, and I don't believe that he should have been. I would like to say, before expressing my complete view on The Last Jedi, is that the sequels that everybody wanted to see, I personally believe George Lucas should have made those films in 1999. Instead of reversing back and going back in time and doing a prequel trilogy on Darth Vader, a character which I believe was perfectly illustrated in that scene between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker in The New Hope, when Obi-Wan Kenobi invites him to his adobe and he says, look, this is who your father truly was. He was a young Jedi who betrayed the Jedi Order, and he was seduced by the dark side, and he killed your father. I felt that as an antagonist, as the father figure that every young hero must overcome, as this villain in the dark mask, functions perfectly in the original trilogy. That there is nothing else to be added to him, and I felt that Anakin Skywalker unveiled the mask behind Vader and demystified the magic and the mystery of this grand villain, and to me just diminished the quality of storytelling there. And that was one of my biggest gripes of the prequels. So I believe if George Lucas would have filmed the proper sequels in the 90s, when imagine Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford are all young actors and are still in their prime, and they could still do stunts, and Mark Hamill could have do maybe like some advanced forms of fencing on screen. That would have been wonderful, and they would have a different quality about them. You know, the late 90s, early 2000s was still a very different school of thought when it comes to filmmaking, and George Lucas perhaps would have pursued his story and his own visions, and maybe employed very talented cast, of filmmakers and maybe even directors to help him along to craft that story. I believe that moving story forward was far more important than going back and doing the prequels. That's my personal impression of it. While the young was still cast, the cast of the original films was still young. There's another point that never meet your heroes twice. The reason that Luke is not the same person is because of the classical mythological motifs where heroes change. And for example, Jason and the Argonauts, when he goes to retrieve the golden fleece, he is the people's hero. He's a young man on his journey who is protected by a goddess Hera, and he's there to fulfill this quest. And he is hero in his people's eyes. Later on, as the myth evolves and generations later, additional stories happen where Jason is already king of his domain, and he's married to Medea, and he's an asshole basically. He's a completely different man, and I think those classical myths are so important and vital for us today, whether it's Nordic mythology or Egyptian mythology or ancient Greeks. The reason that all those myths resonate is because they portray flawed characters, flawed heroes, which we can relate to. I don't think even Superman would have remained such a mainstay in popular culture if he wasn't vulnerable. Yes, we all know of his power, but there's even kryptonite for every Superman that we meet. And that's what makes him engaging and interesting. So another point I would like to make is that for me personally, I felt that Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi was a perfect extension of what we saw in Episode 6, The Return of the Jedi. And let me explain why. First of all, there's a 30-year gap. And as I mentioned in the point above, people change in that time. And let's not forget the fact that there is a story that is being alluded to before we see the sequels. And that is, we understand that Luke Skywalker rose to the occasion. He passed on the knowledge that he has learned as he promised to Yoda. He passed it on to Leia. He restored the Jedi Temple. He had students. He restored the Republic, and there was peace for an extended period of time. He has fulfilled his destiny through and through 100%. So my question to the critics is, what else could you possibly ask from him? Do you expect Luke Skywalker to always be a 20-year-old, always do backflips, always jump off the walls and always come back and save the day and never have his perspective in life change or be altered or enhanced by older man's wisdom, so to speak. No, and I think that when we see him in the final scenes of the last Return of the Jedi, those parallel the Last Jedi perfectly. And let me give you an example. Some fans revere the lightsabers in Star Wars, and they would say Luke would never pick up his lightsaber and throw it over his shoulder and discard his father's weapon so carelessly. That's not Luke. Well, hold on a second. At the end of the Return of the Jedi, when he defeats Vader, what does he do? He understands that violence is not the way. And the only way to truly overcome the dark side, and personified by the Emperor, he takes his lightsaber and he throws it away. Because it's not about the weapon of the Jedi. He is the weapon of the Jedi. He is the light of this galaxy, represented in him, and the Force flows through him. And it's Luke's sacrifice of saying, look, I'm not going to submit to you. I'm not going to join the dark side. You have failed, and I am the Jedi like my father before me. And he throws away the lightsaber. Another thing is that the comparison to him trying to kill Kylo Ren versus Vader. Now, in the beginning of that duel of the Return of the Jedi, Luke is much more in control. He understands what he needs to do to bring his father back to the good side. But there's still that headstrong young Luke in him, and there's still this tensity and aggression in him. And that's how he's able to defeat Vader. You know, at one point where he chops off his father's forearm, there's a moment of anger where he's about to strike him down. And then he looks back at his own hand, which has also became cybernetic. And it's almost like a quiet storytelling moment where Luke contemplates, look, is this what I want to become? Like my father, like a machine who understands nothing but anger and aggression? No, I don't want to be that. And when we see the scene with Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi, Matthew Stover expressed it beautifully in his interview with Star Wars Theory, when he said, look, for me, it was very crucial in that particular scene to ask a question, if not whether Luke would or wouldn't do something like that, such a drastic act, but what would drive Luke Skywalker to commit such a horrible, horrible act of killing off his nephew. And Matthew Stover basically read my mind, because that's exactly what I pictured when I was watching the film, where Matthew Stover says, look, I think Luke Skywalker is so powerful by that point that he sees into the future, and he sees Han Solo's death, inevitable death. And for somebody who was with Han all the way through this journey and liberating freeing the galaxy, that would he trade his nephew, this young spoiled brat, versus his dearest friend whom he bled and suffered shoulder by shoulder with? Probably not. And I could personally understand his moment of weakness and misgiving. And as soon as Luke thinks about that act of saying, look, what do? Do I stop this young monster and kill him right here and now? Or will I permit him to live and he will commit more atrocities and kill more people? And look, after all, Luke Skywalker was right, because Kylo Ren was too far gone, and Han and Leia pass him over to Luke, because Leia mentions that. She says, Han, before you go, and if you see our son, please bring him back. I know there's still good in him, but I know that we couldn't help him. Snoke already corrupted his mind. And that's my very, very important point, is that Kylo Ren was already too far gone when Luke got his hands on him. And Luke tried to influence the young man, but his heart was tainted with darkness. And when Luke goes into that tent with his moment of weakness, and the moment he ignites that lightsaber, he wants to turn it off. But the tragedy of the moment is, by that time, it's too late. Ben wakes up, he looks at his uncle, and there is sudden moment of anger and aggression. It's like, this is what you're going to do to me? He doesn't even try to ask a question like, why? You're betraying me. You're hurting me, uncle. Why would you do this? You were supposed to help me. There was no dialogue. Ben responds immediately, and he responds with violence. So in that aspect, I felt that Luke Skywalker read his nephew, and he read the entire situation right. we see Kylo Ren in the consequent scenes and in the next movie being a villain, and only by the end of it he becomes the good guy. Let me see what other things I wanted to bring up here. Why Luke doesn't show up in the final scene to confront Kylo Ren. There's a beautiful scene that precedes the final duel in The Last Jedi, and it's the one where Luke Skywalker talks about the Jedi hubris. First of all, being not the biggest fan of the prequels, I still enjoyed very much that Rian Johnson paid tribute to the prequels, and he brought that story into the fold, into The Last Jedi, and he made it a discussion. He made an important scene around that. And Luke Skywalker saying, look, thousands of generations of the Jedi, and they couldn't solve the problem. They couldn't save the Republic, and they failed to stop the Sith. Emperor Palpatine was able to outsmart them, outwit them, and the Jedi have brought the destruction of their order by being so short-sighted and blind, and acting as military generals and not practicing what they preach, meaning the peace. And Luke saw that, and I felt that him alienating himself in the Acto Island was not an act of cowardice. Luke does not fear. He's beyond fearing at that point. It's just that he saw the suffering and tragedy of the repeating circle of violence, that even after he restored the Jedi Order, the First Order still came about. The First Order still destroyed everything that he has built and suffered for. And Luke probably felt disillusioned with the Jedi teachings and thought to himself, well, why try then? I'm only one man. What can you expect out of one person? I'm not perfect. I'm not the Jedi Order. I'm just one man. And that's exactly what Luke says to Rey. When she comes to an island and she passes him the lightsaber, she says, your only hope. It's like, what do you expect me to do? I'm aging man. I'm by myself. There's nothing else to be done. Of course, being a young person, she imparts that vital youth and energy back to Luke, and she changes his mind, and that's the beauty of the film. And he does come back and save his friends, but he does it in a way that, to me, crystallizes the idea of perfect noble Jedi. They're not supposed to act of violence. And he demonstrates one of the most powerful Jedi abilities. Across time and space, he's able to physically project himself somewhere else. He's able to touch Leia, and he's able to interact with Kylo Ren to distract him only so his friends could escape without killing his nephew. And it was such a tragic and powerful and teachable moment before Luke's body is gone forever. He tells his nephew, he says, look, if this is the path you want to walk alone, anger and the dark side, you will always be alone. He almost lets him know, like, you need to stop this. You need to come back home. And then he says, see you around, kid. Almost kind of course, repeating Han Solo's catchphrase, but also hearkening what we're going to see in the Return of the Skywalker, where Rise of the Skywalker, where Kylo Ren, spiritually, he comes home. He becomes good guy again. So anyway, these were some of my points, and I want to reiterate that I don't feel that any opinion is right or wrong. And I think we as audience, as fans, should understand that at the end of the day, these are just films. Yes, they're important to us, and these characters, especially Luke Skywalker, are larger-than-life heroes. But at the end of the day, when we have a discussion with each other, I don't think it should come to a point where people are contesting their points so much that we should bicker or call each other names or regard each other stupid because we come from a different backgrounds. Just because somebody disagrees with you that The Last Jedi is a bad, poor representation of Star Wars, it doesn't mean those people are wrong. I like The Last Jedi. And for somebody who wasn't big on the prequel movies, I learned to appreciate a lot of things about them. Why? Because my opinion shifts, it changes, I grow as a person, I listen to other people. For example, if you check out my other past podcasts, I invite Josh from Star Wars on High. I invite Dante. And when we talk about prequels, and they're huge and passionate fans of those trilogy of films, they open my mind. They give me a perspective which I never considered before of why, when they were young kids, and they were watching those prequel movies, what made them so dear to those fans. And me understanding that brings me into the fold as fan. It makes me understand, so that's what it was. Okay, so at least I can appreciate the prequels on that ground. And I think the same is with sequels. If your heart is open, if you don't come into each argument with just anger and trying to prove everybody wrong, then perhaps you will see something interesting in it. Or maybe you won't, and it's completely fine. Just because you don't like a film, it doesn't mean that the rest of us shouldn't. And that is my message for today. That was the whole reason behind this video, to engage fans in a meaningful conversation, because I'm completely tired of all this negativity. I'm completely tired of people having this single one-track mind who only can understand things in their own way, and everybody else who, disagrees, their opinion is inferior. If you don't like something, it doesn't mean it's bad, and that's my motto of the day. Anyway, guys, my name is Benjamin. I do Star Wars comic book and book reviews. I do character highlights. I do lore videos. I do artist highlights, and so forth. If you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing, hitting that bell button. Please leave your comments in the comment section below and let me know whether you agree or disagree with some of my points on Luke Skywalker. And I will see you next time. Take care.